Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to crumble!
I'm Joshua Kemble, and welcome to Joshua Kemble's Livestream. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 20 years. I was an art director for 9 years. And when I'm not art directing and working on illustrations and graphic designs, I'm working on comic books and graphic novels, and that's usually what I do during my streams. And while conversations can go all over the place on this stream, from spicy and entertaining to goofy and silly, one thing stays consistent throughout every stream. I'll always be working on art. So pull up a chair, get your art supplies out, and get ready for an entertaining show that'll keep you company while you work on your own personal art projects. This is Joshua Kemble's Art Stream. All right, welcome to the live stream. It is a Sunday morning, a bright and early Sunday morning. I'm going to probably be streaming for about an hour, working on coloring page 104 of Not Death of the Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. We're going to finish this page up today, probably do like a good chunk of it this first hour. And then from there, we're going to probably break around 11:30. I'm going to take a break so that I can go record music at my buddy's house, because we do that every Sunday. It's actually a really exciting time to be recording a song there, because we have 9 songs tracked. And so there's a couple things that we basically want to have 10 songs before we release an album. So that means there will be new music that my friend and I wrote. I'll be releasing, which is pretty exciting. And aside from that, the only delay on that is our good friend who plays drums actually just moved back to California about like 2 months ago. And so he'll be recording live tracks to the 9 songs that we have recorded so far, and hopefully the 10. So once we have the 10 songs tracked, which we're tracking with Drum Machine, we should be good to like send those, like basically have our friend come up, go in studio and track drums to all of those songs. So there might be a little bit of time, aside from the fact that we still have to write the 10th song. There might be a little bit of a delay, but I'm imagining within like 2 or 3 months, we'll probably have a new release for No Saboteurs, which is pretty exciting. So, speaking of music, before we get into working on comics, I have been going on a tour, letting you guys see different guitars I have, the different uses they have, and the different work that I've done on them. And we're approaching guitar number 14. So I'm going to show that to you guys real quick. Landon just joined the chat saying, "Hey dude, how's it going, Landon?" Okay, so I'm going to show you guys my classical guitar, which I think out of all my guitars, I did the most work on this guitar. So it'll be exciting to talk about, because this thing was a $16 guitar that I made play, in my opinion, at least at the level of a $500 guitar. And so I'm very proud of this guitar, the work I did on it. I did a lot of this work on stream, but it's going to be fun to kind of show you guys this before we get into it. Now, Landon, technically, I'm kind of breaking some rules, because 2 of the guitars that I've listed, actually 3 of them, are arguably not guitars. One of them is a bass guitar, another is a ukulele, and the other is the 6-string banjo that I showed on the last stream. I'm just for the fun of it, including those in my guitar collection, because in my opinion, they're all kind of guitars. But that's controversial. There's a lot of people who would not consider a ukulele a guitar. A lot of people who wouldn't consider a bass guitar a guitar. And there's a ton of people who consider a banjo a guitar. But I feel like they're all close enough to where I'll include them in my list guitars. So before show number 14, I'm just going to run through real quick what we've looked at so far on this little segment. And this is just a fun way about something creative to get the juices flowing before doing the monotonous work of, in this case today, flat coloring comic pages or panels. So the first guitar I showed you guys was my Squire 2 Strat, which was a guitar that came out in the 1980s, and I bought it used in the 90s. And I bought it used at a pawn shop for like next to nothing. And it was the first like real guitar I had. Prior to that, the only guitar I had was what was called a Synsonics. This is going to show you how old I am. When I wanted to pick up guitar when I was about 15, maybe 14 or 15, I had a friend over who was spending the night, and we were both perusing the Sears catalog, looking at instruments that we ordered. And I saw a guitar called a Synsonics, and I ordered that. And it was pretty much like a piece of plywood with strings. It was an awful guitar. And if you ever see them pop up used, usually what you'll see is like one that had like a built-in amplifier. That mine was like a notch below that. It didn't even have the amp. So it was just this horrible guitar. It was literally one of the worst guitars ever. I ended up breaking it on stage in my early 20s. But anyhow, point being, my second guitar, the Squire 2, that was my first real guitar. Like that was decent, that held tune somewhat, and that's okay. And then I showed you guys my Squire Telecaster, which was my first guitar that I bought new. And that one, there's been not a lot of work that I've done on it since owning it. I had to fix some of the electronics on it, and then I did swap out the the saddles on the bridge to be brass saddles. Not brass saddles, sorry, stainless steel saddles. And then I also did change out the tuners on it to be locking tuners. But aside from that, it's pretty much stock. Then I showed you guys the Jasmine acoustic. That guitar was my first acoustic guitar. And after I ended up getting the guitar I showed after that, my Siegel S6, which was a solid top acoustic, that poor Jasmine sat in garages for over like 7 years. So when I started getting into working on guitars, I actually thought, I wonder if I fix this thing up, because the tuners were shot. And there were a lot of issues on that guitar. So what I ended up doing was finding a similar set of cheap tuners and cleaning up the fretboard, wheeling the fretboard, cleaning the guitar, and making it a functional guitar again. And that's my Jasmine. That was a really bad guitar, but it wasn't a bad guitar. It just was a cheap acoustic guitar, a good cheap acoustic guitar. Then after that, I got the Siegel S6, which was a solid top. Siegel, a great company. They are in Canada. They use all these beautiful woods that are local to Canada. They're very known for using a lot of cherry wood as well in their constructions. And that was probably the best guitar I owned at that point. It was just a beautiful one. And then Paul was saying strum or pick. I always just say pick, but I am a strum rather than a picker. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I can do picking, but I do flat picking when I do picking, so I'm not like a finger picker. Although I will be playing something that requires a tiny bit of finger picking when I play this classical in a second. So, okay, so that gets us to the S6. Then I showed you guys the modded Squire Telecaster. That's another pawn shop buy. It was a red Telecaster, and I really enjoyed it, but I didn't like the pickup so much on it. Plus, when I bought it, the intonation just shot through the roof, so I had to adjust the action and the intonation on it. Again, I replaced the saddles with stainless steel saddles, locking tuners. But on that one, I actually redid all the pickups so that it had a hot rail pickup in the bridge position that also had a toggle switch so that I could basically push pull pot, so that I could pull up one of the tone knobs, and when I pull it up, it actually makes the hot rail, which is a humbucker, into a single coil. So you kind of both tones from it, and then I put a P90 in the neck position, and a P90's got just back to it. I love that guitar. That is my shreddy. If I want a Telecaster sound with just a crunch, like with heavy attack, that's my go-to. Um, and then after that, I got the Sterling Beats, or I showed you guys the Sterling bass, the Stingray bass that I bought, and so that I could record. I had a bass prior to that, which was a Squire P bass back when I was in high school, and that ended up getting traded or swapped or something. Ended up disappearing in my early 20s. But I always wanted to own a bass, especially being in a more modern era where you don't need like a 4-track to record stuff. So when I was sitting down and I was like, I'm gonna make a solo album, which I did. Like I'm gonna need a bass. And so I did some research and I found out that Sterling made these incredible bass guitars. So I bought that, and I still to this day am stunned by the quality of that versus like an entry level bass guitar back today. It's just the quality of guitars has improved so much throughout the years. So then I showed you guys my Fender Telecaster, which is just amazing. So and that was my first like real guitar, like real Fender. My first guitar that's like in the thousands in cost. Um, and then I showed you guys my Luna VM Soprano ukulele that I also got to be able to track songs and do some tracks on ukulele. And then I showed you guys my Gibson SG Standard, which is a again my first Gibson, and honestly it was a dream of mine because I really admired a lot of guitarists that played Gibsons. Even though to this day, if somebody asks me, you're on a desert island, you can only have one electric guitar, which one would you pick? I'd any day of the week would take a Telecaster over anything. Telecaster is the best guitar. It's just the best guitar. It's the best tone. It's the best build. It's the easiest to upgrade. It's just a perfect guitar. But the SG gets a different tone and a different feel, and I loved it. And I loved it so much that I ended up getting the 59 Les Paul Epiphone. That's the Inspired by Gibson series. So it has Gibson burst bucker pickups in it. And that is a perfect guitar. I love that guitar. And then I showed you guys, so that's up to 10. I showed you number 11, my Hummingbird, Inspired by Gibson Hummingbird. That's my first and probably last dreadnought I'm ever going to buy, but it was because I already have 2 other dreadnoughts. But also there's some really good questions in chat too that I'll get to in a second. So the Inspired by Gibson Hummingbird 2 is the first all solid wood acoustic I got. The tone differences and quality differences of that guitar compared to even my Siegel, which is a great guitar. Like to this day, if somebody was like getting into playing acoustic guitar, they wanted a decent dreadnought that's not going to break the bank, I would recommend they get a Siegel. But I will say that Hummingbird is my best acoustic guitar. It's a beautiful guitar. It's all solid wood, and it does the job. I don't need a better dreadnought, so I'm pretty much probably done with buying dreadnoughts. Then I showed you guys after that Yamaha FG75 that I bought, which was I bought used for under $100. It was in really bad shape. The nut was torched on it. The frets had been worn down to the board, and the bridge actually the the bridge was like basically I think it's called the saddle still on the bridge. Bone saddle had been sanded down to the point where it was like the strings were actually touching the wood of the bridge. And the guitar was just dirty and disgusting. But I picked it up because it was a red label Yamaha, which is a rare era of Yamaha that were incredibly crafted and have like a really high reputation in the industry. So I was like, hey, if I'm going to get a cheap guitar that has high value, if I get it working, this is a really good opportunity. So I bid on it on like a Goodwill site and was shocked to actually win for under $100 to get a red label Yamaha. Yeah, even in bad condition, is a pretty good deal. So I did, and I was looking for a parlor guitar, so it kind of filled two functions. So that one I did a ton of work on. I fully refretted the guitar, meaning to pull out the frets. I radiused the fretboard, so I sanded the whole fretboard and added a new radius to it. I cleaned it up heavily. It took a while to clean up because it was just ages of dirt. Again, this is a guitar from the late '60s, early '70s that had seen a lot of play, so it needed a lot of work. And then I adjusted the truss rod and got that guitar in pretty beautiful working condition. I added a new nut. I resanded a new settle, and basically now it's one of my favorite go-to acoustics. And it's got a punch and a sound, like a loudness to it, and an attack to it that you're just not going to get from a dreadnought because it has that parlor kind of vibe to it. So I love that guitar. So I showed you guys that. And then the last one I showed you was the Erin Banjo, which is a really cheap, under $100 banjo that's a 6-string banjo. And I love it. And I told you guys about how horrible it is. It's an awful guitar. It's actually really well crafted for under $100 banjo, but it beats you up to play it. But I love it, and I've tracked songs with it, a few songs with it. And so we showed that off and played it, and that gets us up to speed with what I'm going to show you guys today. So I'll show you the guitar that started out as a $16 guitar, and I think plays close to like a $500 guitar now after all the work I put into it. Before that, let's answer a couple things in the. So Landon said he has 4 or 5 guitars and a bass. Nice. And then Landon said, "How did you learn how to work on guitars? If I attempted doing any of the stuff you're talking about, I'd mess with the guitar." Part of it is I've just been obsessed with that kind of stuff for years. So I've consumed a lot of content watching other people do it. And so that's number one. Number two is I'm really patient and cautious. And so I don't rush jobs. And this has been a benefit and a negative in my life. But I tend to take my time with things. And so I think that was a big benefit, because if you try to rush doing a refretting a guitar, you're going to destroy your guitar. But the other thing is research, and then just practice, just trying it and realizing, like, the beauty of working on guitars is like working on anything else. Once you've done it once, you're like, oh, well, I could do the next thing. It's kind of like working on a car or anything like that, where it's like, it's very intimidating until you get your hands dirty doing it. And then it kind of becomes addictive because you're like, oh, I guess I can do these things. Landon said, why a Telecaster over Stratocaster? So I am keeping my eye out for a Strat, and I have a birthday coming up, and I've been so impressed by Firefly, and that's a guitar I'll be showing you guys in a little bit, but I've been so impressed by the 338 that I ordered through them and the quality of that really, they have no business selling guitars that are that high quality for like in the hundreds. Because they play like, some of those, especially the setups and the feel, it's like almost equivalent to some of the Gibsons I own, and that's insane. So I'm curious what their strats are like, and I need a Strat. Like my Squire 2 Strat kind of works, and I got it kind of working. That's one of the few that I modded and upgraded and stuff, but it's just that guitar is just not gonna sound like anything more than the guitar it is. And so I need a decent Strat in my arsenal. I still have a soft spot for Strats, because Strat were, when I was beginning, that was my favorite guitar, was a Stratocaster. But as I've gotten older and more seasoned in playing, I like the simplicity of a Telecaster. I like the limited options. You don't have as many tones to kind of go through, and I like clarity of a Telecaster over that of a Stratocaster. I like the fixed bridge. I will say it's really fun to have, a bridge that, has a whammy bar or whatever, and you can get that wiggle stick vibe on it, and you can get bends and all that kind of stuff. And it does make for a more kind of bouncy, interesting guitar. I will say, if you're talking about a guitar just to get feedback with, like cool feedback, like Sonic Youthy style feedback, a Strata is going to win over a Telecaster any day, right? Because williness of the bridge, being able to get that tremolo and the, a trem system on it is always going to knock, like a Telecaster out of the park. Even if you took a Telecaster and added a Bigsby to it or something, it's never quite match that. So if that's the tone you like, but for me, there's just nothing that sounds better or plays better than a Telecaster. I love Telecasters. I think they hang perfectly. They're real simple and just get the job done. They're just like a tool that can play any genre. They have just enough variety and tone, but not too much, because I think sometimes with Stratocasters, there's like so many options of tones you can get that you can actually lose something in that process. I feel like the limited options of a Telecaster make it a superior instrument. And what's weird is, I think I'm not alone. I think a lot of guitarists will start out really heavily prioritizing something like a Stratocaster. Um, and then as they play more and more, they'll start being drawn more to a Telecaster, partially because of the simplicity. And then again, the tone. You just never get that attack, that quackiness that I love is just never going to come from another guitar Telecaster. So that's my reasoning for Telecaster. Plus, I just think it plays better, and you have more tonal options. Like there's something about a Stratocaster. Again, the neat thing about guitars is they all kind of do their own thing, but a Stratocaster has like real. It has a Strat sound and a Telecaster has a Tele sound. They both have unique sounds, but I feel like a Telecaster is more adaptable. So I could play hardcore with a Telecaster, or I could play like blues, or I could play country. It's like the Telecaster kind of encompasses all. But again, I have a Strat, I have a Les Paul, I have an SG, I have like a lot of the kind of main go-to guitars, and I think they all fill a void. Like there's a reason I have so many. I think they all have a particular sound that the other can't get. But I'm just saying, like for me, my own experience, I think a Telecaster is the most versatile of all of those things. So that's me talking about that. So now I'm going to show you guys my classical guitar, and then we're going to color comics till about 11:30. So this is my beautiful my beautiful classical guitar that I got. It's a let's see here. It's a Jom Guitarras de Calidad from Mexico. And more particularly from let's see here. Paraco, Mexico, which is a place that makes the most high quality acoustics. Yeah, and I saw the thing. This thing did not look anything like what you're seeing here. I saw this on Goodwill's website in really bad condition. It had painted on fret markings, which was interesting. The painted on fret markings were really unique. Like they were like these little crosses, but they were like, I don't even think they were painted on. I think they were just silk screened on. The frets were just torched on it. You could tell the frets were worn almost to the board. And then this was just a dirty, just disgusting kind of, I don't know, it's hard to imagine, but it's like, imagine just a layer of thick dirt over this thing. And again, like the bone bridge was worn completely down, so the strings were actually touching the wood of the bridge. And then the was actually was actually incorrectly installed. It was upside down, and it was like at a tilt, like it had been glued on at a tilt. And then the tuning pegs were torched. And I saw this thing and I bid on it. I bid on it because I liked a couple things. There's a couple things I liked about it that I saw. One was the discoloration that was going on here. I was like, okay, that's going to be like a decent chunk of rosewood. Weirdly enough, that told me that the wood's not bad on this guitar. Another thing that symbolized that the wood wasn't that bad on the guitar was the discoloration here. Where it was like, wow, that's legit. And then I also saw on the back some of this kind of figuring going on in the wood, and I was like, you know what's crazy? That looks like a really good guitar if it just had some work in it. And I don't have a classical guitar. And so I was like, I'm gonna get that thing and then put a lot of work into it. So this thing arrives, it plays okay, but it kind of sounds bad. It has dead frets all over the place. What I end up doing is ordering brass saddles that are gold that match the previous saddles, and pulling out all the old saddles. Because I'm a steel string player, I decide I'm going to add a radius to the fretboard. Generally, a classical guitar has no radius, means like there's no curvature whatsoever on the neck. And I was like, I don't like that. I want a radius on my classical guitar. So I radiused the fretboard, and I did a lot of this on stream. I ended up buying and cutting a new nut for the neck and installing it correctly, as well as like sanding it so that it had proper height. And then I also replaced with a new bone nut down here, and I also changed out the tuning pegs for a newer version of tuning pegs that I installed on screen as well, and ended up being way more complicated than I thought because I actually had to sand the tuning pegs to where they would fit. And this guitar is interesting because it's an old classical guitar, so it's not like it has a steel reinforced neck. This is just wood. And so I was a little concerned when I took it on that, you know, this guitar was from 69, I believe, from 1969. And so I was like, a guitar that's been around from there, um, it's like without a truss rod, I'm pretty much just relying on the fact that doing that work, that fret work and stuff like that, will fix the neck. But if the neck has relief issues, other than that, the only way to correct that would be to replace a new neck, or basically remove the neck and basically sand it so that I could manually tilt the neck because there's no truss rod. Luckily, I did all this work and it works. Oh, and then there's a couple other things. I liked the idea that there were fret markers on it, which is unusual for a classical guitar because classical guitars don't tend to have fret markers. But when I had to radius the neck, I of course sand off the screen printed little crosses that were on the neck. And by the way, I'll also tell you this: the neck was in such bad shape and so disgusting and just muddy and gross that you couldn't even tell it was rosewood, right? When it first came in. For me, the only indicator that it was an actual rosewood was that discoloration down here. And to my surprise, when I sanded it was this beautiful rosewood, where you can really see rose in there. Even here, you can kind of see like some of that lovely like rose color showing through. And after conditioning neck, and all of that, it kind of returned it to its former glory, if not made it a better guitar. So I also installed my own fret dots to it. So these were all basically these pearl dot inlays that I put in myself onto this guitar and refretted it. And I feel like I did a better refretting job on this than I did on the Yamaha. So anyhow, that gets you through all the way up to guitar number 14. And now let's play real quick and then work on comics. So here it is. And I'm just going to play a little classical thing I learned. Because once I have a classical guitar, there's some things you can play on classical that sound great, but it's just played a little differently than a non-classical guitar. Okay, coffee in. Let's get into it. Here, I'll move the mic so you can hear better. So anyhow, I definitely did not get that perfect, but that gives you an idea of like the kind of tones you can get from a you can get like a different kind of set of ranges tones because like a nylon string just sounds a lot different than a steel string. Anyhow, so whatever. I'm just noodling around, but it's a beautiful guitar. And again, I got this for 16 bucks. I probably put about $40 to $50 into it, and for about probably like under $100 of, and then a week's worth of work, I got a classical guitar that plays better than any classical guitar I've ever held. And I got to say, when you have that kind of moment, because Landon was asking about like what gets you into working on guitars. When you have that kind of moment where you can take a guitar and cost $16 used that everybody had forgotten about, that part of why it's $16 used, right? Because it's like at a pawn shop, is like he understands what's under there because it's just been so beaten up throughout the years. And you can take that, clean it up, like refret it, give it 50 to 60 more years of life, and make it sound better than any classical guitar you've ever played. Plus, action on this, I can't even describe how easy this is to play. It's like I can go, and there's no dead frets. It just sounds beautiful, and it's easy to go like high on it. It's easy to go over the place, and it's customized for me because I'm a steel string guitarist, not a classical guitarist. And so I like little things like this. There's fret markers, and rather than like have to deal with like, oh, well, there's no fret markers, I guess that's what I just deal with. It's like, no, actually I can install my own little fret dots and make it the guitar I want it to be. But once you do that and it's successful, then it gives you confidence and the desire to kind of do that with more things. It's kind of like working on anything old and forgotten about. You can make it beautiful again. It's just a really cool. It's just a beautiful experience. So anyhow, this is a great guitar. It's a good classical guitar, and that is my guitar number 14. And you'll probably see this or hear this on a couple recordings on the next No Saboteurs album. So with that being said, let's play a trailer and then let's get into comics. So let's see here. Here is Kids Say Kemble.
We know that Georgia kids say the craziest thing.
So, little Susie, do you have any brothers or sisters? I understand you're in 3rd grade. How do you like that? Do you like your teacher? You like to do a lot of fun things at school? You got any hobbies, Susie? Any things you like to do when you're not in school? I hear you like to read.
Well, right now I'm reading 2 stories written and illustrated by Joshua Kemble. It grapples with faith and mental illness. It's ultimately a story about redemption. It's a savage piece of writing. Also, I just finished up Jacob's Apartment, another one by Kemble. Jacob's Apartment weaves together elements of spiritualism and relationship dynamics, as well as atheism, and all the while it deals with abandonment and loyalty. It's a fierce, fierce read.
Do you like ponies?
All right, now let's actually get down to brass tacks and do that's my little hobby stuff, guitars. But anyhow, we're almost through it, guys. We're almost through my journey of going through different guitars, explaining what they offer. Obviously, this thing has a different tonal, offering than like a regular steel string acoustic. It's a little more tender, more bright, a little more classical, in its sound. And there's some times where when we're recording, we're going to want that sound. Plus, it's a challenge as a guitarist because it's playing. The playing is a lot different. Just the way you approach the thing is a little different than it would be on a steel string. All right. Although I'll still butcher it, just like I said with the banjo, where if somebody really hardcore banjo player and they see me playing banjo, they're going to be like rolling in their grave. It's the same thing. Like this, I do not play properly. And I probably will end up playing it more like I would play a steel string, where there's a lot of strumming, and palm muting and stuff that you're not traditionally going to hear on a classical, but it gets a different tone and it's a different tool and I like it. So, okay, now let's get to coloring some comics, guys. Okay. So this is page 104. I ended up finishing coloring this on Artcast, or not coloring, but shading on Artcasters on Corey Kerr's channel this week. And so now we're get into it. In the best of ways. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting in flats. I'm going to go to page 103 to select colors, so that we're keeping the colors consistent in the scene. And then we're going to kind of go through and punch in the colors. There's a couple things I want to check. One is I want to go in here and select on the borders only and select these areas real quick that are easy to select. Modify, expand. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill that in on a layer called color. And I'm just going to make that, the flat white. Okay, so there's that. There's a couple other things I want to do to prepare. So what we've done is we've made a flat layer, right? That's underneath only the areas that I want to color. And I've locked the transparent pixels. Now the only thing I'm going to do is underneath that, we're going to fill in the color for the word balloons, which eventually when I'm done with all my flats, I'll merge with the rest of my flat colors. The nice thing is this page has no color holds and it's mostly just flat colors. So we should be able to get a decent amount done. Although honestly, I talked a little too much about guitars. And again, I have a hard out at 11:30. So we'll see how far we can get in 30 minutes of flat coloring. But regardless, when I'm done recording today at my friend's too, I'll probably come back on and finish up this page because that is one of the things I need to do. What else? So I have been in battle, a constant battle with backyard in the last few days. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but it's like in the desert, weeds are insane. Like they grow like jungles in our backyard. And our backyard is not like, it's a work in progress. And so I've had this like thing where I've been carving away at trying to get rid of all the weeds in our backyard. And initially we were in a position where like our lawnmower wasn't working anymore. And finally, so the lawnmower got working again. And between that and a weed whacker, the last few weekends I've been just, attacking this jewel in our backyard. And I finally finished the majority of the like really heavy work on that. So now it's just about like maintenance. But man, that was yesterday. So yesterday I was like, covered in mud. Like it's funny. Every time I go back there, I look like I just went to, some kind of jungle warfare or something. And it's just weeding in the backyard. But luckily, I wear like a mask and stuff like that, and I'm surprised. But I'm like, I'm not incapacitated like I've been like the last few times because I get really bad allergies, and so quite often if I do that, it's like, man, my allergies are going nuts. So right now, what I'm doing is selecting everything in panel 1 that's white, and then I'm going to basically end up selecting the inverse and color filling it. And hopefully that'll make sense in a second. So we're taking out everything in this image that's going to be color filled white. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of as a select. I like to work kind of reductively like that, where it's like you're taking something, you're taking a wider selection, and then you're taking out, like punching out the areas that are, large areas of color that you're going to want to, color fill. I always view flat coloring because this is how it used to be done back in the day, especially if you were doing it with like ruby lith film. It's like all you're really doing is it's almost like you're just cutting out pieces of paper that go underneath line. Or if you want to think of it like cell shading, you're just kind of coloring on the back of a cell that has inks on the front, right? Flat coloring stuff that's gonna go through. So right now, if this was construction paper, right, all I'm doing is just cutting out everything that's white from the construction paper. Something that sometimes happens when people are working on digital art is they'll divorce themselves from the original process that they're trying to mimic. And I think when you do that in error. So it's like when people digitally paint, they make really great digital paintings until they forget what they're trying to mimic. Like, what kind of paint are you using? And if it's mixed media, it's like at this point in the mixed media process, what am I using? Am I using an airbrush? Am I using, colored pencils? Am I using paint? Am I using acrylic paint? Am I using paint that you paint opaquely, or am I using paint that you paint transparently? I think just asking those questions and keeping in touch with what you're trying to do will give you a much better effect in the final result. Because I do think where people err a lot is if they forget like the process they're trying to mimic in the first place, and then they end up making this strange art that ends up looking kind of like very digital, but there's just something about it that's kind of cold and wrong. And a lot of the time, the thing that we see where we're like, when we're looking at digital art that just kind of feels wrong is quite often like, oh, I know why it feels wrong. It's because like in general, if you were painting an oil painting, at this point it'd be wet on wet, or at this point it would be this. But generally, you'd be painting like the darks before you paint the lights. And so it's going to look weird if you look at like a digital oil painting where they're painting the lights before the darks. It's just going to look really digital and blurry and weird, right? And I've just noticed that. That's just a personal preference, but it's like I always feel like you should try to kind of remember what you're trying to look like, what process you're trying to mimic. So in this case, a lot of this would be done with, shading, and potentially like ruby lith cut, But, my inks in this case would have been done back in the day, probably with like a coquille board and a black colored pencil, And so that's always something I try to keep in mind. Okay. Maybe not so effectively, but that's at least something that helps me when I'm doing digital art. Because I have noticed sometimes people will work on digital art and they'll be like, why does this look so like generically digital? I don't understand. And I think that's kind of one of the telltale signs. And sometimes maybe you want it to look like absurdly digital. Maybe you don't mimic, a traditional approach. But in general, with this stuff, you are trying to mimic something traditional. And sometimes you may not even be aware that you're trying to mimic something traditional, but the awareness of it can actually be really useful in setting limitations. Because there's a lot of freedom in your limitations as an artist. Like, as a graphic designer, you get so much freedom when you limit yourself to 3 fonts. If you limit yourself to like, okay, I only use these 3 fonts, suddenly you get real creative in your usage of those fonts. And then if you break your own rule, you have like a real good reason for it. So then visually it becomes like justified. I don't know if any of that makes any sense. We might just end up flat coloring one panel. I thought we're going to bust through all of this. And I think that during this particular live stream, there may just be one panel. Possibly just one. Landon, what's your favorite guitar? You were talking about your guitars and you were asking why a Telecaster rather than a Strat. What is your go-to? If you're on a desert island, you could only bring one electric guitar with you, right? Which one would you bring? Keep in mind, like in this question, a lot of people might be like, well, obviously I'm going to bring an acoustic guitar. So let's assume you'll have access to electricity and a really nice amp. just to rule out that that kind of broader area of justified speculation where you're like, well, I mean, do I even have access to electricity? Because in that case, maybe I'd want to, just have an acoustic, But I am kind of curious in the world of electrics. What do you prioritize? I'm really excited about Paul. Paul Pate has gotten really far on his Detective Perez book. It looks like it's going to come out real soon. And that's pretty exciting because I know Paul's been carving away at it. Paul also said my favorite guitar is the one that I'm not playing. That might be mine too. I like that. All right. Let's do his eye color first because that's a real easy selection there. Shift F5. Man, I hope I can at least get through one panel during this stream. That'd be pretty lame if this is a comic stream and I don't even finish a panel of her. That should at least happen. Let's do his vest color now. I think it's the same as his eye color. All right. Again, just kind of cutting out paper that goes underneath. Now, keep in mind, like, this is not my flat coloring process for everything. It's for this particular style. There are different ways to approach color, especially depending on what you did your inks with, right? So if your inks are kind of like traditional pencil type stuff, then your color might end up a little different than other scenarios. All right, so we're gonna do. Now we can do his hair color. Let's do that. We'll kind of work our way through it. But I am excited to kind of see what comes up for our 10th song. Because the way we've been collaborating on this album is like very much like a weird kind of improvisational style where not that we're just improving the music, but we're doing a lot of like yes ending when it comes to like writing the songs and tracking things, where if we have like a wild idea, we're just kind of allowing ourselves to be like, yeah, let's explore that and see what happens. And it's been really productive, and it's led to like songs that are really strange. And so I'm really excited about that because it's definitely going to be an album that is hard to categorize or be like, oh, this is this kind of album, because it's got like its own like weird sound, and we're doing songs that even surprised us, where it's like that doesn't even sound like anything we would ever do. It's just kind of leading to wherever the music leads, right? So often we'll be starting with just like a little riff and then kind of moving from there and writing the song as we're recording it, which is a really fun process. But I can't wait. I really am excited to share those with you because I think it's some of the strongest stuff I've written musically, which is, not saying a lot because it's not like I'm a really strong songwriter or anything, but I'm pretty proud of it. Okay, we're going to do skin tones now. Got a good 15 minutes. I think that'll be enough time to knock out this the flat colors on this. And I would encourage you guys too, if you're not yet, hit that subscribe button and that bell so you get notifications when I'm about to go live. Because in about 15 minutes, we're going to call the stream. And then right after that, like a couple hours later, maybe 2 or 3 hours later, I'll be right back to finish up this page and live stream again later today. So you don't want to miss out. Okay. So again, we're kind of picking the color here. And then I want to do his suit color real quick. And we will finish these colors for the day pretty soon. So there's definitely no question that flat will get done by the end of the day today. I've talked to you guys about this too, where my approach to this kind of thing has changed a lot from when I was younger. When I was younger, it was like I would kind of put this stuff at the cost of my health. where I'd be like, man, I'm going to finish, this many pages a day or stay up till like 6 in the morning, like working on this stuff. And I've now finally gotten to the point where I'm like, you know what, if this puts me a little behind, but that means that I sleep and have my health, I'll go with the slow and steady progress over the like kill yourself for overworking kind of route, which is what I used to do, so hopefully that shows and and starts kind of benefiting things outside of comics. Not that it ever becomes easy or you're not like sacrificing something to do work, but it's like I have a line that I won't cross with that I used to cross all the time. Okay, we finished one panel. And what I'm going to do right now is play another trailer, and then we'll see how far we can get on the second panel. Maybe we can get 2 done before this is done. But we have 1 done, which is good. So, let's do Christopher Runciman trailer. Christopher has a new book out too on Amazon. You guys should all get. Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name's Chris and I like comics. I want to talk about this comic for a second here. I just got this in. I ordered it direct from my local comic shop through Diamond Distributing. It's Joshua Kemble's Jacob's Apartment. I really enjoyed this book. There's all kinds of comics out there, let's be honest. There's fun comics, there's superhero comics, there's young adult comics, there's adventure comics for kids. There's so many different things under the planet. But there's also an entire subgenre of alternative books. Real life, real world depictions in comic book form. Situations that happen to each and every one of us. And this is a fine example of that. If you get a chance, order this book from your local comic shop. You won't be disappointed. I can't sing its praises high enough. Okay? Check it out. Jacob's Apartment by Joshua Kemble.
So thanks to Christopher for that. And now we're gonna basically see how far we can get in like 12 minutes before I have to go. How far can we get on this process? These are actually, this page is not as complicated to color as some of the previous pages. So every once in a while, like in comics, it's weird, you'll have this variety where every once in a while you'll have a page that's going to take 2 or 3 days to color. And then every once in a while you have a page that'll take like less than 2 hours to knock out the colors for. And, that kind of makes sense. It's like you're going to have pages that are like that with inks too, right? Where they're like just wildly complicated pages as opposed to, some pages that are not. But it is always nice when you're knee deep in a over 100-page project. Paul knows, and it's a quick page. Be a real morale boost when you're in the thick of it. It can do the adverb if you get like a crazy complicated page and you're just like, man, this is just never going to get done. But it can be a real boost to have one that you can just knock out super quick. And hopefully if you've designed your comic, decently where there's a lot of variety to it, it will vary a little bit. Every once in a while you'll have a crazy crowd scene. I know Paul has a lot of wild crowd scenes in his Detective Perez book, his latest one. But I guarantee there's some pages in there that are probably 2 or 3 characters having dialogue or something like that. And it's like, that can be a nice little rest after you do some like pretty wild pages with like crazy perspective or something like that. Although for Paul, I don't know, man. Paul is incredibly quick at making comics, so maybe every page is a morale boost. I have no idea. Okay, let's get this eyeball again, I'm just deselecting all the white on here. A good 9 minutes to go. This is one of those things that bugs me when people don't spend some time working on comics who wanted comics, because it is amazing what you can get done sometimes in like 15 minutes, you know? Not always, but the way I always look at it, is like, hey, I could wait to do all of this till after being at my friends, right, and get a lot more accomplished all in one sitting, or I can like take advantage of the 30 to 15 minutes or whatever of free time I have to work on this thing. I have to get done anyway. And the next time I sit down, I'll have that much less to get done. To me, I'd rather be in the position of like, just use the time I have. I heard somebody talking recently about defense, like, and it was like a military strategist and stuff. And I can't remember who the quote was from. It's from a famous army general, but they basically said, if you go to battle, you go to war with the army you have, right? That's basically it. It's like you can't waste too much time thinking about the army that could be when you're in the fight. You just kind of use the tools you've got. Same thing. You go to army, or you go to army, you go to war with the time you have, right? Like with creative pursuits. Look, you've got the time you've got. Like, let's say you have 3 jobs and you have no time, then sorry, have the time you've got. And you can fantasize like, oh, when I'm here, then I'll be able to do this or whatever it is. But that's all just kind of gesture. Whereas like you have the resources you've got. And what are you going to do with those resources? Maybe at a future date, you'll have better resources. But if you can't, begin the fight with the resources you have, you might end up, by the time you have resources, just having no fight to have because you've literally lost the war, right? So I don't know. I think it's actually a pretty inspiring thing, even though it can be really, discouraging too. It's like, dude, you've got what you've got. Do what you've got. Um, you know, Paul said, nice feeling when you can feel some progress by getting a few quick pages in. Exactly. And weirdly enough, like, those little attacks, having victory with small resources can give you a huge morale boost for when you have bigger resources. I think a lot of people who are waiting to work on personal projects till they have the time to do so might be missing out on the valuable self-discipline that you kind of build up, using really spare amounts of time. Because if you haven't built those up, and you may not know what to do with all the time you're given. Like if you are in a luxurious position where like all the time in the world opens up and you can work on things for whenever, however you want, and you've got unlimited supplies to work with, you may not be able to get much done because you haven't built that self-discipline to like down and get done in the face of hard odds. I don't know. So that's something I've been thinking lately. Is use the army you've got, like, sure, pursue finding other things, but I thought that was really good art advice from like a general. It's interesting. I guess the art version of that would be like, you can attack the page with the things you've got. Don't wait for the things you don't have. Sure, you can plan for other things, but if all you have today is like a sharp and a piece of, Xerox paper or whatever, use that. Is Xerox paper even a thing now? So it would just be called copy paper or printer paper, huh? I should say fact paper, just make myself really old now. But yeah, like a case in point would be all the guitars I've been going through. It's like I wasn't waiting to get all of those guitars before writing songs. You just kind of write songs with whatever guitar you happen to have. If that's a piece of plywood, then then that's what you do. If you wait till you have like all the perfect instruments or whatever, you're never gonna write music, you know. Or maybe you will, but like you're gonna really make it harder for yourself as opposed to just, you know, you look at like Spielberg, like Steven Spielberg was filming stuff with like a Super 8 camera when he was a kid, you know, and like he wasn't waiting for like, Hollywood budgets to make movies. He was just making movies with what he could do, and then that led to more movies, you know, and bigger budgets and more resources and stuff. And by the time he had the huge budgets, he knew what to do because he had done it on nothing, you know. Um, whereas like imagine like a first time filmmaker who has no idea how to work with nothing, having everything. You could see how easily somebody could burn through that. Another good example, financial responsibility, right? Like if somebody has never had to balance a checkbook and then they are given $1 million, how quickly do you think they would just burn through that money like an idiot? Like point being, like if you don't know how to work with a budget, when you're broke, how do you think that's going to get any better when you're like a millionaire? you know it's just not. You start to learn to work with what you've got, and then you start having more resources, you might be in a position where you'd actually be a little more responsible with them. By the way, I'm not above that. It's like, dude, if I like when I was in my early 20s, if I had gotten like some killer record deal with like millions of dollars, I probably would just burn through it. I probably wouldn't have known better. You know, you know. Now if I got like that kind of payday, I'd like to think I'd be a little more responsible, just because of life experience and knowing a little bit more about finances and stuff like that. And even then I'm not cocky enough to be like, yeah, I'd be totally responsible with that. What do I know? All right, here we go. We're almost there. We have 2 more minutes left. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I might go a little bit longer and just finish up this page, this panel. So right now what I'm doing is all the skin tones on Mr. Home. We have 1 minute left. 1 minute. See if we can do it all in time, or if I have to go over time. Hopefully I don't even have to go over time. That'd be pretty rad if I get this done at the exact dot. But yeah, we're probably going to go overtime by 1 minute. So again, like I just imagine, where would I be right now if I had just left it at that first panel and been like, yeah, I'll leave in, a minute or two, 5 minutes, 10 minutes from now. So I'm probably not going to get a lot done. I'll just call it. And, when I have the time, work on it. It's like, no, actually, by just being like, hey, let's see how much I can get done with the time I have. Now I have one less panel that I'm going to have to do tonight, which is great because, coloring 4 panels is a lot less hard than coloring 5, right? That's a hard mode to get into, is like the the mode of, and having kids helps you get into this mode. Because I think prior to having a kid, I think I did have more of those like artistic fits and starts where I'd be like, yeah, I really feel like writing today. I'm not inspired. I can't work today. That kind of stuff happened a lot more before having a kid. Whereas like once I had a kid, you're so like your time resources are so um taxed. Like you don't have a lot of time ever. So like anytime you have like free minute, you learn pretty effectively how to balance like every free minute you have because you just don't have that much. And so it helps to budget time and resources. Okay, I'm going to make the rest be magenta, the unfinished part. And then I'm going to take one look just for you guys and for me to feel a little better about what I got accomplished. We're going to take one last look at what we got done. So those top two panels are colored. On the next stream, we will into it. And Paul said, "Hey, nice to see you, Josh. I hope to catch you later today." Oh, Paul also said, "Ditto graph paper, the worst paper to draw on with a Ticonderoga #2 pencil." And I know because I'm from a similar generation, I know exactly how you found that out. I know, like as a kid, that graph paper though was great because you could like fold it real long. I talk about it in two stories, but yeah, it was great because you fold it like these long landscapes or maps or whatever. But yeah, that was awful paper to draw on. All right, other than just it being big and white on one side. All right, have a good one, guys. We're gonna call it. I will finish the rest of the page later today. If you want to know how to kind of keep in touch with the stream and stuff like that, just hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you get notifications. If you watch this and you enjoyed it, please hit like. All right, guys, I will see you on the next live stream. I hope you guys have a productive Saturday. I'm gonna go record some music. Bye.